Hey guys, Mo Long here, and I'm really excited to showcase this unofficial build of RetroPie running on the Raspberry Pi 4. So I say unofficial, this is a completely functional version of RetroPie, just it's not associated with the RetroPie project. Instead, this comes from Steve, who is the brains behind Rot or RetroPie on the Tinkerboard, as well as Slash TV, which is an Android TV operating system for the Asus Tinkerboard. And right off the bat, I'm just really impressed with how well this runs. I like the default theme here quite a bit, with this group of recognizable characters, and the carousel style navigation is just really aesthetically pleasing. And it does remind me a little bit of RetroPie on the Tinkerboard. They use a pretty similar user interface. And what was really impressive about this is the way that I was able to get up and running so quickly. I merely mounted my RetroPie build to a micro SD card, and it's a 16 gigabyte image file, which is pretty large. But the benefit of that is I was able to power on my Pi 4 with a 256 gig flash drive connected, filled with ROMs from my Raspberry Pi 3B Plus RetroPie game console. And right away, all those ROMs, as you can see, were recognized. I did get connected to Wi-Fi, but I didn't even have to run any updates to install additional emulators to have those functional. So that out-of-the-box performance is really kind of a nice addition to this RetroPie build. So without further ado, let's take a look at some. First up, I want to take a look at some arcade games. Not surprisingly, arcade games run really well on the Pi 4. But let's see how some Nintendo 64 games run. Performance wasn't great, but it was in a lot of spots better than on my Raspberry Pi 3B Plus. And the Pi 4 is a pretty capable device. So hopefully, as some of these emulators become optimized for Raspberry Pi for hardware, we will see better performance for some of these newer systems like the Nintendo 64. Goldeneye is always one of my favorite games, and I actually really liked the Wii port of Goldeneye. I thought it was a pretty faithful recreation of the original game, but updated with better graphics, level design, and controls. So if you haven't played that, highly recommend tracking down a copy. Now, let's take a look at some PlayStation Portable emulation. This probably isn't going to be great. It's going to be a bit hit or miss, but it'll probably at least be better than on the Pi 3B Plus.
Kratos, the ghost of Sparta. Had taken his place amongst the Olympians as the god of war. The bloodshed, the relentless battles, had finally brought him here. Ares was dead, and though Olympus beckoned, visions of his mortal existence still haunted him. Kratos, help me. Kratos knew that this was not a mere vision. For with the gods, nothing was ever as it seemed. The vision of his past set Kratos in search of answers. Answers that lay in the temple of Poseidon, deep within the city of Atlantis.
This is not a wise course of action, Kratos. It was a dream, nothing more.
The visions still haunt me, Athena. The visions you promised to take away. But this vision, I can change.
Perhaps it is a vision best left unchanged. There is more to this than you know. Please.
As expected, PSP games are going to be pretty hit or miss. And as you can see there, things were really choppy even when I toggled frame skip on to 4. I don't really like using frame skip at all, but it's kind of the only way that you're going to get PSP games to run, at least at this point. Let's also try out some PlayStation 1 performance. And PS1 games should run really well on the Pi. They ran incredibly well on the Pi 3B Plus, so the Pi 4 should have no problem handling any PS1 emulation.
Are you ready? Are you mad inside? Got you strapped down too?
PS1 emulation on the Raspberry Pi 4 really shines. And that Wu-Tang Clan PS1 game, it's one of my favorite games of all time. And I actually think it's really underappreciated. So that's one of those games that if you can find a copy, definitely pick it up. I also do want to take a look at the options menu here. So it is pretty much identical to what you'll see on the official RetroPie project menu. So you'll have different options for audio output, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi. You can install a number of different splash screens. You have a file manager. It's just a really pleasant inclusion here. And I think if you didn't know that you were using an unofficial port of RetroPie, you'd probably just think you were using a version coming from the RetroPie project. And I think that really speaks to the dedication that Steve brought to this port for the Raspberry Pi. And you can use a number of other OSs for emulation on the Pi 4. There is a pretty good Locka build, and I'm sure RetroPie and Recalbox will drop their own Raspberry Pi 4 images. But in the meantime, and even when those drop, I really think this is one of the best, if not the best, Raspberry Pi 4 emulation OSs that you can use. It's just super easy to fire up and get running, and it even remains compatible with RetroPie mount folders from previous installations. So this is probably what I'll keep using for emulation on my Pi 4. And I'll probably keep using either Manjaro, ARM, or Raspbian for a desktop environment. Thanks, guys, for watching, and keep on gaming.